Dr. Shah, thank you so very much for participating in this 50th anniversary of the LBJ School. You're the son of immigrants. You grew up in Detroit. How did that shape your career, your aspirations, and your belief in America's promise?
Well, thank you, Tom, for having me, and thank you for your extraordinary leadership in so many ways across so many parts of society, including at the LBJ school. My parents, as you mentioned, immigrated here in the late 1960s. They came really without any financial resources at all, but they did come with a firm belief that if you came to the United States, frankly, went to school, did well, worked hard, that this was the land of opportunity, that you would rise as a family, you would offer your children untold opportunities to do well. And that basic American dream has been instilled in me since I first had a chance to go to India and see where my parents actually grew up and the kinds of neighborhoods they came from, and put that in context. So I've always kept that with me, and that's been a big part of why I feel so fortunate to have had a career where I've gotten to be in roles where I serve others and try to really extend that hopefulness and that sense of aspiration to people who otherwise don't have that.
But you're a medical doctor. You have an education in health policy and in economics, yet your career has largely been in philanthropy and in government. Why did you pursue this course?
Well, I grew up wanting to both be a doctor and help people, and wanting to be, frankly, an economist and sort of change the nature of societies to make them more successful and to create more opportunity. When I was very young, I had a chance to visit where my parents were from, and I just saw a level. I might have been 9 or 10 or 11. And I saw levels of poverty that, frankly, I hadn't known existed growing up in suburban Detroit, in a very nice suburban neighborhood. And I kind of got me thinking, well, why do some nations do so well and others struggle to provide opportunity to their people? And so I got interested in both medicine and economics, and it just so happened that I had a chance to pursue both academically. And then I got my start in politics, actually, when I left medical school to join Al Gore's presidential campaign, lived in Nashville, Tennessee, was there on election night at the War Memorial when I thought we had won, and it turns out we had not. And so I was looking for work, and thankfully got introduced to Bill and Melinda Gates and got to join their foundation.
Many of us thought that he had won. It was quite an experience. You led USAID under President Obama from 2010 to 2015, and you helped to steer that agency during that tragic Ebola crisis. What did that experience teach you about what we should be doing today about the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, I learned a lot from that experience, Tom. The first thing I learned was just the power of leadership. I mean, I remember coming together in the summer of 2014 with the White House and President Obama and the president laying out that, look, this is a threat right now that is causing widespread death and devastation in 3 West African nations, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, but that it could also come to the United States. And we had to get on top of this, both because we had to protect people in West Africa, but also to keep our nation and our globe safe and secure. And that strong statement of clear presidential leadership, and then the tone that President Obama set from that point on, where we said, we're going to make decisions based on science and data, allowed us to make a lot of tough decisions. We kept it, we made a decision to keep airline flights open so that health responders and workers could go back and forth under safe protocols. We made decisions to invest massively in collecting data on testing and contact tracing, so we knew who was positive almost as quickly as they became positive, so that we could put resources in place and prevent transmission. That sort of data-driven approach that starts with testing and knowing who's positive where in real time needs to be the hallmark of any pandemic response. And frankly, that's why the Rockefeller Foundation worked very hard to create a national testing action plan in the United States and frankly in many other countries around the world to help elevate the role of data and evidence in the context of the pandemic response globally.
Well, I want to ask you to tell us more about the role of the Rockefeller Foundation with this pandemic. We've heard about your role in testing, and what are your goals going forward? Because this epidemic seems not to want to let loose of us. And certainly at this point, we are hoping for a vaccine, but even that is in question.
Well, I think you're right, Tom. We look at the landscape and believe that coronavirus, COVID-19, will be a significant pandemic threat through 2021 and in the United States and most of the industrial world, and probably through 2022 and maybe 2023 in much of the emerging economies around the world. If you look at India, parts of Latin America, big parts of Africa, they are just now seeing big spikes in testing positivity rates that exceed 20%. What that effectively means is they're on the rocket ship part of the exponential curve, that they're going to have many, many, many more cases before this thing subsides. And we know that social distancing and mask wearing and certainly vaccine access are going to be far more difficult for the billions of people who live in less developed nations around the planet. So Rockefeller has been really involved in bringing together people from science and industry, businesses that are involved in diagnostics and testing, policymakers in the United States. We brought together Republicans and Democrats, believe it or not. We could get them together to come up with ways to invest in better efforts to test and trace against the disease so we can bend the curve here in the United States. And we're now doing the same in Latin America, in more than a dozen African countries, and in the highest hit states in India, like Maharashtra, which is a state with 120 million people, where every time they test, there's a 20+% chance that someone's positive.
Right, this pandemic has also brought to the forefront the racial inequities that exist, that in so many ways have hampered our country's progress since its founding. That also was one of President Johnson's major goals, and his efforts to pass the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. And in that, incidentally, he had great support from Republicans like Ev Dirksen and others. Tell me how the Rockefeller Foundation is rising to this moment in our nation's history when we have these racial inequalities and are now even seeing so much of this move into protest and riots that are so divisive in our nation today.
Well, Tom, I appreciate that question. I know that in your service as a trustee of the Rockefeller Foundation, you brought real leadership to this issue. But John D. Rockefeller himself started the foundation in part through a real Northern Baptist ethic around healing racial inequities in the United States. And many of the foundation's earliest efforts more than 100 years ago were aimed at that objective, including the support for important universities like Spelman and Morehouse, as well as efforts to expand both disease control and expand educational opportunity throughout the American South. Today, we take that strong legacy forward with a sense of pride and commitment, and we have been active on COVID-19 because Black Americans have a 5 times higher likelihood of being hospitalized from COVID, and that tracks to a much higher mortality rate as well. So we are supporting, I think, the largest and most focused racial equity experiments or efforts to address COVID using community health workers in Baltimore and assessing the results of their work by focusing on African-American communities. We're supporting pastors in Georgia to get the message out to certain communities. And across the nation, we're working to recruit lower income and minority populations into a large-scale national testing and public health awareness campaign and effort. And that's just true because it's critical, because it's part of our institutional history, and because it's very much about meeting the moment today. I would also note that we recognize that African American and minority communities have been so much harder hit economically than the general population. They make up a much bigger percentage of essential workers. Women in particular have 54% of the job losses in the United States have been women, despite the fact that they are 39% of the labor force. So it's been an extraordinarily inequitable distribution of harms that have been caused to the American public. And so that's why we say COVID-19 has both illustrated and exacerbated the inequities that have for far too long defined American society.
So many young people today want to make a difference with their lives. President Johnson wanted this school of public service to make a difference itself. If you could sort of give advice to a 25-year-old Raj Shah out there watching this now, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to a young person? 25 is only a number younger than 25. What advice would you give if they would like to do so much of what perhaps you have done and are doing?
Well, Tom, I was so moved to see and hear from the students directly about their own experiences and aspirations at the LBJ school. And at the end of the day, I would just say follow the mantra, get in the arena. It is only by doing that you get a sense of feeling like you've made a contribution. It's only by doing that you let those energies flow and you get the rewards of feeling like you're serving others. And frankly, it's only by doing that you learn enough to kind of have some battle scars and some learnings that help you be more effective and grow in your career over time. And one of the things I admire about the LBJ school and the way students have articulated their own aspirations is it's all about getting in the arena. And I'll tell you, when I was in that age, I was in medical school. I actually was the recipient of a scholarship that allowed you to go to med school and simultaneously work towards a doctoral degree in a scientific field. In my case, it was around health economics. But the point is, the school was paying me to go to med school. And I really wanted to get in the arena, and I didn't know how. I just didn't know how. So I kept asking one of my friends, who happened to be Al Gore's kind of personal aide, whether I could join the campaign. I got rejected 3 times. And then their campaign was not doing that well against Bill Bradley in the primaries. And they decided they would kind of shed a lot of their staff and move the campaign from DC to Nashville, Tennessee. And I reached out a 4th time, and my friend said, well, they won't pay you, but if you get in your car and you go, here's a person you can volunteer for, and then, see what happens. So I went to my professor, who my department chair, who managed my scholarship, and I said, hey, I'd like to take a break and do this. And he's become such a good friend of mine now, Dr. Sankey Williams. And he looked at me and he's like, Raj, that is, we've been given this scholarship for decades. No one's ever said, I want to take a break to go volunteer on a political campaign. But I just had that desire. So they let me do it. And because they let me do it, I learned, I started at the bottom on that campaign and got to work my way up to a job where ultimately I was getting paid, I think, $350 a week. It launched my ability to be in the arena a little bit. So I just would say it's hard. I know it's hard. It involves taking risk. And I just hope you as students have people around you that will support your aspirations to be in the arena.
Raj, we've just seen the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I think all of us continue to be really so saddened by that loss. She was a visiting scholar at the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center and actually wrote her book, Women, Men, and the Constitution, Key Supreme Court Rulings. What made her so special? And what are the lessons for those, particularly the students, but for all of us who are viewing that? What made her so special, and what are the lessons of her life as you see it?
Well, Tom, as you know, the Rockefeller Foundation is so proud to have for decades been a platform that allows extraordinary leaders to take some time out of their very busy careers and reflect on what they're learning along the way. And she was a recipient of a Bellagio Fellowship where she was asked to reflect on her Supreme Court casework. I think she was a lawyer at the time for the ACLU. And she took time out and wrote that piece that became so important to the future of her career and to American judicial thinking. I think the lesson is I only met her a couple of times and didn't know her that well, but I from afar would just say that the lesson was this fierce determination to be the absolute best at what she was doing and to do that on behalf of others. In my view, she had a fierce ambition to serve our country and to make it more equitable and to bring the very best of legal thought and scholarship to that task. And I've had a chance to see the CNN documentary, which I think is such a special piece that describes how she did that. But that persistence, in my career, I'm so grateful. I've gotten to meet a number of people who won the Nobel Peace Prize, from President Carter to Nelson Mandela to Dr. Norman Borlaug, another Rockefeller alum. And I'd say the one thing I'm always struck by is those individuals they just are passionate about something and they stick with it for 50 years. And I imagine that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it was that passion that kept her going until the very, very end for this country.
Well, Raj, we are nearing the end of this wonderful interview. The Rockefeller Foundation now has passed its 100-year mark. And I just thought as we come to a close, why don't you share with us your vision for the Rockefeller Foundation going forward into this next 100 years?
Well, Tom, the reality is often it is in the toughest moments and the darkest moments that we give birth to great ideas, great innovations, and amazing leadership that, transforms society for the better. LBJ's presidency started in a dark moment, and he reshaped a sense of American aspiration around inclusiveness and equity and justice. And in the same way, I think at the Rockefeller Foundation, we look around right now and we see folks in the street marching against racial injustice. We see too many Americans, 203,000 have died already from COVID-19, most unnecessarily. We see the loss of economic activity and educational attainment of lower income and minority kids in particular, and a recovery and a devastation economically around the world that has now pushed almost 500 million people back under an expanded definition of the poverty line. And I think it's in this moment that we're going to invest in people who are dreaming about an equitable recovery. We're going to invest in ideas that can bring renewable clean energy to 1 billion people that still live in the dark, and ensure that a decade from now, people will say that we recovered from COVID-19 in a way that was inclusive and took a big step forward towards the end of extreme poverty. We're going to invest in new data systems that allow us to see real time where pandemic threats are as they emerge without government interference, so that this never happens again across our country and across our planet. And we're going to continue to be a platform, as we've been for 100 years. So the next generation of Ruth Bader Ginsburgs can reflect on what they're learning and get back into the arena strengthened and more capable of creating change and building a better world. So we're very hopeful. I think the LBJ School is also very hopeful, and it's an honor to be here with you today.
Well, Dr. Shah, we are so grateful to you for your participation today. I know I don't speak for President Johnson or his daughters that often, but I think I can say how very proud he would be to have your presence as a part of this 50th anniversary program, and the work that you and the Rockefeller Foundation are doing, not just hoping to make this world a better place, but you are literally making our world a better place, for which we are all very grateful to you and to all of your staff, your board at the Rockefeller Foundation. Thanks again for your leadership. Thanks again for your participation today.
Thank you, Tom.